is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I'm here in Cancun at the Passport to Freedom conference with Tuur Demeester, who I've known for a number of years. We actually did an Anarchast episode before when he was in Santiago, Chile, but there was a camera problem or something happened, and so we lost that one. But I think this one will be even better because he's moved on. He's done so many things. He was actually one of the first people I knew of who was really talking about Bitcoin. He's a real Bitcoin guy. He had a financial newsletter in Belgium that talked a lot about Bitcoin. This was years ago. So he's ahead of the curve. He's here speaking on Bitcoin, doing a lot of stuff. He's starting up another financial newsletter now, which will be very Bitcoin focused, which I think will be very good. And so let's get right into it. So Tuur, how did you become an anarchist?
Yeah, it's been a while that I thought about this. The way it happened was I remember getting a slight interest in politics. And I read this book by a Belgian politician, and his message was basically, this is as good as it gets. And I was like a bit underwhelmed. I was like, oh, all right. And then I met some student friends, and they were talking about liberalism, which is in Europe, it means kind of classical liberalism. And so they talking about the principles, like, oh, wow, I really like this stuff. And in about 2 weeks, I was too radical for them. I was like, no, man, you got to go talk to those guys. They're like, and then it was into classical liberalism, and then from then on discovered Rothbard and Mises and the Austrian economics, and the last straw was losing the idea that direct democracy was anything real, because that was what I was kind of holding on to, like, oh yeah, in Switzerland it seems to work with the referenda and all that. There's a lot of history, haven't had a war in 700 years, so I was like, oh, that was a good story. But then there was the question, well, how do you justify that? And I was like, oh yeah, there's this unwritten social I was like, but then all of a sudden, I remember the moment as we were riding on a bike, me and a friend, we were discussing, it's like, but there is no such contract. So that was the moment that I became an anarchist.
That's great. Yeah, the social contract. I don't remember signing it either. It's a ridiculous concept. Switzerland's interesting right now. You're into currencies and Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff. Swiss franc just went. It's very interesting. You brought up that it was a decent place. Actually, if you told me or asked me 20 years ago, if you had to live in one place, for a place that you felt that was the better place for you in terms of freedom, I would probably say Switzerland. And then they pegged the Swiss franc to the euro. They went completely off the gold standard. Then recently they had a referendum, which was, I think, rigged, but they said, no, we don't want to back the Swiss franc by the gold. And then just 2 days ago, they unpegged, and the Swiss franc rose 40% in one day. But now if you keep your money in a Swiss bank, they charge you 0.75%, 0.07, less than 1%, but they actually charge you to actually hold your money in a bank. So a lot of interesting stuff there. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts.
Yeah, Switzerland, I really think, and then this is one of those examples, direct democracy doesn't save you. We basically see a population that's held hostage financially by their central bank. I mean, Philip Hildebrand, that was the president of the financial bank, he was fired a few years ago. There was all kinds of shenanigans going on in that space. And yeah, I mean, the population does not control what happens with their currency, with the thing that they use for 50% of every transaction. So I would definitely say that that's not contributing to their freedom. So yeah, we need the move to final private currencies. I mean, the revaluation of the currency is great maybe for Swiss franc holders, but then all of a sudden these businesses, the watchmakers and all the tourist businesses, they're all of a sudden faced with a price hike of 30%. They're going to lose business. So yeah, let people just choose their own currencies. This thing of communist central planning, communist financial central planning is so ancient. We need to get rid of it, I think.
Of course we do, and it will happen. One thing that I found interesting is a lot of people talk about Bitcoin and they say it's so volatile. That's why I don't like it. Well, look at the Swiss franc, look at the Russian ruble, look at the Argentine peso, look at the Venezuelan bolivar, and soon the euro, and soon the yen, and soon the dollar. So people are confused and they need to learn and think more about this sort of things.
Yeah, Bitcoin really is a startup currency. It's like a junior currency. And obviously that means it's very volatile. Microsoft early on was a very volatile stock. But what people don't realize is that, all these fiat currencies are much more mature, but they're all Enrons, I would say. So, the collapse is going to happen. Where do you want to be? You want to be in the volatile places? I mean, I'm not advocating people to go like all into Bitcoin, but I do think you want some exposure as an insurance against this. I was gonna say bordel. I didn't even know if that's an English word, but in French they say like quel bordel. It's like what a whorehouse. Like the whorehouse of of fiat monies. I mean, I do think you need some insurance because it may be not very likely that in the next 5 years we'll see this overarching collapse, but insurance doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Just a little bit of Bitcoin, for example, I think is an excellent insurance.
I agree 100%, and I've said the exact same things. You don't have to put all your money into Bitcoin. We don't know where Bitcoin's going to go. It could go to zero if there's something unexpected happens. It also could go to $1 million if it actually becomes a real currency. So you don't have to, just be exposed to it. If you don't know about it, check it out. It's very important for freedom as well, to get away from these, as you call them, whorehouses, or here in Mexico, they call them puderias of central banking communism. It's crazy. And we're going to get off it. And now you're here speaking a lot on Bitcoin, and you're a really good speaker on Bitcoin. You explain it very well. Why don't you just briefly sort of say what you were talking about here at the conference?
The main argument I made is that we are going to see government defaults. I don't just say this. There's a lot of data, I think, that supports that. The debts in the West are the highest they've ever been in history. There's data that supports that, both private and government debt. We see inflation on the rise. And we also have had a huge banking crisis that's unresolved to date. If you look at historical patterns, it's very clear. High and rising inflation, high government debt, and banking crises are the cocktail that cause government defaults, be it an internal government default by means of hyperinflation or an external default by just literally defaulting on the payments, not paying your foreign debt anymore. So I think that's going to happen. And when that happens, governments are going to scramble for any kind of income that they can find. And they like liquid income. They like something liquid that they can resell, that they can pay their workers with. If you looked at what happened in Russia, and that's some of the examples that I gave, is that local governments were accepting barter items for tax payments. And that's a huge headache, especially if that money then has to trickle up, move up the chain to Moscow, for example, or in the US to Washington, or in Europe to central governments. It's a huge headache, and lots of money is lost. Also, like if you have high inflation and you got a tax bill due, it's like a thousand units of the currency. Well, why not wait a month and then you only have to pay half, and then maybe there's some kind of penalty of 10%, but still, you wait long enough and the value of your taxes becomes zero. So governments, I think, are going to embrace Bitcoin when the time is there that the default actually happens. I think so, yeah.
That's interesting. I haven't really thought about if governments would embrace Bitcoin at some point. I think if they do, there won't really be much government left because they're all financed by the central banks. The governments really can't exist in their current form, all-encompassing, welfare states, war all the time. You can't do that without a central bank because that's how they do it, through printing of money. As Ron Paul said, that it's no coincidence that the 20th century was the century of total war, is also the century of central banking. Tell me your thoughts of if the governments embrace Bitcoin a little bit, what do you think will change with that?
First maybe some more about why. I think, for me, statism is really a religion. So it's interesting to look at religions to see what happens there, to kind of have a template what could happen going forward. And what we saw is that in the 19th century, for example, the Roman Catholic Church was super powerful and had a lot of influence, had a huge network of priests that were propagating these beliefs. And but over time, as it became less and less popular, the church became more lenient in their ways. Right now, recently, we've seen the Pope come out pro same-sex marriage, right? Pro Same-sex marriage, that was completely unthinkable 1 generation ago, completely unthinkable. But the reason is they're quite desperate. They want to keep their bases. They want to keep the religious people come to their churches and pay them some money. So I think the same thing with governments, really. I mean, they're going to, at some point, when these defaults happen, when their income is floundering, when, like in Iceland, the people were surrounding his house, this Icelandic prime minister, surrounding his house with torches, they were afraid. And then all of a sudden, they want to cut deals, and they're lenient, and they're going to accept Bitcoin. They're going to be forgiving when you don't pay all your debts immediately. I mean, that's what we see happen in Latin America when government defaults. And I think it's something that it's going to be like more difficult for a while, but this is the process by which the government is going to shrink, I think.
Yeah, so many things going on right now, like in New York, and I have to sort of give a shout out to Chris Cantwell and Larkin Rose on this, because they talked about maybe we should kill cops because they're actually evil and immoral. And I was always like, no, don't. Violence is never the answer. But in New York, some guy killed 2 cops, and all the cops don't work anymore, and it's actually much better. They're not extorting people, they're not beating people up anymore. It's sort of like what you're saying, like once the people sort of awaken a little bit, these institutions, which are really just religions, like government and the Catholic Church and things like that, have to change, because people just won't put up with their craziness too much. So it's a very interesting time. And I actually should say this, I haven't said this before, but I think a few people have noticed on the last 2 videos, I'm wearing a cross necklace. I want to say I'm an atheist agnostic. I don't know what life is. I don't know why we're here. My son gave it to me for Christmas, and so I'll very proudly wear it. And I also think Jesus was an anarchist, a very awesome person. So I just wanted to mention that because we're talking about religion. So you're such an interesting guy. There's so many things we can talk about. Is there anything else you want to get into? Anything on top of your head?
Well, when you were talking about these, like how change happens in society, I was reminded of a study I read about recently, and it was about peaceful revolutions. And it is true, it turns out that according to the study, that it's enough for about 3.5% of the population to take action for it to have actual effects on policy and the government. And I'm not a big fan of this. I think the major place where you can change the world is at home and how you raise your kids. But what does turn out, according to the study, is that they've become more effective, and that's because of social media. It happens much faster, and politicians have, in a much quicker way, have the feeling of what people are thinking. And this direct line of communication really informs their decisions, because at some level they want to cater to the market. They don't want to anger their tax cattle too much, right? So I think that's really encouraging that these peaceful uprisings are becoming more effective. And also, like, maybe one more thing is that with this, I mean, we had the Internet of Information, but now the Internet of Property is really coming up. That's what Bitcoin is. It's the base layer of the Internet of Property. And that's going to liberate entrepreneurs around the world to be active in the cloud. Like, why would you care about borders? Create a company, put it in the cloud, accept payments from anywhere, and you're free as a bird. And I think that's just awesome to live in these exciting times, I think.
Totally. And that's a big part of this conference, Passport to Freedom, talking about these things. And I've been talking about it for years, and you've been talking about it. We can free ourselves, but it all starts at home, like you said. You have to change yourself first, and you have to. When people see you change, it's like an energy that sort of just spreads. And you brought up like it's only 3% needs to know these sort of things for things to change. I've heard like 5 to 10%. I think communism in the 20th century, which really caught on and is just about to end now, was like only 5 or 10% of people. And they're usually in these back rooms talking about these things, and they made that happen. So now the U.S. is communist. The whole world's communist with central banking. But thanks to the internet, we can really change things very quickly. I think we're going to see a lot of change. So if you want any final thoughts, and also let people know if there's anything you're doing where they can find out about you and things like that.
Yeah, and talking about, like, I mean, anarchy to me is really, the core is nonviolence, and really bringing that into practice. And a lot of people talk about, going into the streets and protesting, but really the place where you have the most impact when it comes down to nonviolence is violence against kids. And you see more and more people are speaking up against, they call it spanking, but it's basically beating of children. And I think that percentage also applies there. If 3 to 5% actively speak up against these. I think they're crimes. The damage is very easily ascertained. If you look at people that are struggling with addictions late in life, depressions, incarceration, all these things have a very high correlation with child abuse. So I'm really encouraged to see this happen more and more. And I think that's the place where anarchists should really focus. And on the other side, become an entrepreneur, really work in the marketplace and show what you're worth and break away from these bureaucratic institutions. And I think that's what life is really about and what makes it exciting. Finally, what I'm doing, I don't have a lot to report yet. I'm pretty active on Twitter. People can follow me there. And I have a newsletter coming out in 2 to 4 months. Will be Bitcoin focused.
What's your Twitter?
My Twitter account is tuurdemeester.com, TUURDEMEESTER. Just Google my name, and that's the first thing that pops up. And people want to know more about what I'm doing, and feel free to contact me. I'm happy to talk Bitcoin.
Awesome. I haven't even talked to you much at this conference. We've been so busy. I'm having a conference next month, Anarchapulco, and we're having all kinds of amazing things. Like you brought up the two things you think that are going to change the world is entrepreneurism and treating kids like human beings and not beating them and disciplining them in a physical manner. So we're going to have a 2-day exo-base entrepreneurship camp, and we're also going to have Dana Martin there talking about unschooling and peaceful parenting. So I don't know if you're thinking about coming. Have you thought about it at all?
I haven't. It just came on my radar. I'm already booked. I'm in the Caribbean in February, so not the worst place, but I won't be able to make it to your conference. But best of luck. It sounds interesting.
Yeah. So for people out there, check it out. That's how we're also going to change the world. Just kind of waking people up to these concepts. And you're such a smart guy. How old are you, by the way?
31. I don't know. Maybe I look younger.
Yeah, you look younger. You look like you're 25 or something, but very, very bright and smart. And there's so many people like that out there. I meet them all over the place, and they're almost always anarchists. So there's a lot of change going on. It's going to be exciting times, and lots going on. We just talked about currency collapse and all these kind of like things that are going to be massive. Bitcoin's rising. Not in price, but it's been down recently, but it's catching on. It's being used more and more all the time. And so that's another thing you can do. Just start using Bitcoin. That's how you can sort of affect change in your own sphere, is by just getting outside of these communist central bank systems. And also subscribe, like down below. It's super important. That's how you actually affect change. It's actually really easy. There's no violence involved. There's no fighting. There's no one goes in the street. Just hit like and share if you like this information. So definitely subscribe to our channel. Check out what Tuur's doing. Pay attention to what he's doing. He's starting up a new newsletter soon, and we'll probably have him on again. And so a great pleasure to have him on. So that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
This is Anarchast.